fans, this is Nick Peltzer with MMA Fight Night Live Podcast. I'm here with Joe Devlin. As always, we're back following another UFC Fight Night in these coronavirus times. And this card actually delivered pretty well, I'd got to say. Joe, how you doing, first off? And secondly, what'd you think of this last fight card?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I'm maintaining like you. I enjoyed the card. The one thing that I thought about with the UFC putting together a lot of these cards quickly during, the coronavirus time, White type contender series fights on the cards, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But you got to think a lot of the big names out there, they're less likely to take a fight on maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks notice than some of the upstarts that are looking for a shot at making a name for themselves in the organization. So I kind of like the card in that it allowed a lot of that young talent to kind of get exposure, especially during these coronavirus times, and there's not a hell of a lot on TV. So overall, I thought it delivered. We'll go into that a little bit later, but what did you think of it?
I had fun with it, man. I thought, as you said, the matchups were pretty, with the name value involved, it was pretty subpar. But with that, you tend to get a lot of good fights, a lot of fun performances. And I thought that we got a lot of that with this last fight card. And even with some of the bigger names on the card, it was kind of funny how those ones probably were the more underwhelming, with the exception of maybe Mackenzie Dern. But the main event, with Gilbert Burns and Tyron Woodley, I mean, we did get like a stellar performance out of one of the fighters on that fight. And so, I very much enjoyed it overall. There was a lot of finishes, a lot of fun highlights. And it was actually funny. I found myself disagreeing with the fight that won fight of the night, even though it was a great fight. But whenever you have to argue about who won fight of the night, you had a pretty good fight card,
Yeah. When you got a lot of good competitive fights, a lot of good showings, you're going to have those situations. I remember back in the day, the UFC seemed to be a little more generous, trying to give out more performance bonuses. I haven't seen as much of that lately, but definitely a lot of guys that are making, like that 20, 30, 40K number that could have used that boost in rev to help their bank accounts. But nonetheless, we're here as fans.
Yeah. And I mean, that was another thing. I thought there were other fighters who probably could have gotten performance of the night. Performance of the night went to Mackenzie Dern, who got an amazing knee bar on Hannah Cyphers in the first round. Great way to come back. She after her pregnancy and the birth of her daughter, she came back and underwhelmed against Amanda Ribas, I want to believe. I want to say. And so to come back in this fight, this is obviously a big, important fight for her to stay relevant and show that, that this new passing time in her life where she's now a mother doesn't impair her ability to fight. And unfortunately, that's always going to be, a question asked probably more so towards female fighters who become parents as opposed to male fighters. And, but she delivered with flying colors, got performance of the night, which is a nice little, bonus on top. And then Gilbert Burns, the main event, absolutely stunned everybody. Not me, because I knew that was going to happen. But I really was shocked by Woodley's kind of lack of performance in this fight. But you can't take anything away from Gilbert Burns. But the second he got hurt in the first minute of the first round, he just never came back into that fight. It just seemed like he was in the passenger seat the entire time, never tried to rally back, or at least never tried to show, visibly to us, or the audience watching, or even to his corner. I felt like that he was not trying to come back in that fight. What were your thoughts on that? And what do you think about Gilbert Burns' performance?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Gilbert Burns put on a hell of a performance. He's been, he's starting to really steamroll some of these guys at 170 pounds. And when you saw him next to Woodley and how they matched up, you couldn't believe Burns ever made 55. I mean, Burns was clearly the bigger guy against Woodley. It's kind of like the when Chiesa moved up to welterweight, and you're like, God damn, this guy was at 55 before. Super, super, super impressed by Burns. And again, not to take anything away from him. I'm more concerned about Woodley in this case. That's basically 10 rounds in a row where he's just gotten washed at this point. Kamaru kind of, did run over him. And, to an extent that was that could have been seen coming. His strengths matched up well with Tyron's strengths. I find them to be similar style fighters. And in the power wrestling game, Kamaru has the edge. In the striking power game, I would say they're about even. But Tyron was on the back foot the whole time. He let Kamaru dictate the pace, do this and that. So that's done. You fast forward now, all this time later, and Tyron's there talking about, it was a bad night. He just wasn't in it, but now he's refocused. He's out, calling out these guys that are trying to leapfrog him, the Leon Edwards of the world and whatnot. And then he goes out there and he does the exact same thing. So, at this point, and sorry, he does that. And then after the fight, immediately within an hour, I believe, he was on Instagram Live, just chatting it up with the people and everything. But he seemed very, very, and he said it himself, like at peace with the loss. And as a fight fan, I've seen in some cases some of my favorite fighters go down that same path where, they get tuned up a little bit. They're a little later in their career, and they get a little gun shy. And they're in the fight, but they're never on the, they're never on the offensive. They're throwing one or two shots at a time. They're not stringing together combinations, not utilizing their entire game. They're fighting a defensive style fight. And this is the second fight in a row we've seen that from Woodley. So the question is now, when you look down that list of welterweight contenders, the top 5, the top 10, who does Woodley fight? Like, who can he beat out of that group? There's some real hard questions that Woodley and his team, I think, have to look at right now to see what he wants to do with his career. I may be getting a little too ahead of myself, but within the first 2 rounds, I said this is going to be the whole fight. It's going to be 5 rounds of this. And one of my favorite all-time fighters, I won't say his name, but one of my favorite all-time fighters had the exact same thing happen, and it was so painful to watch his final fights because it was the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah. And, I just don't want to see that from Woodley. So that was my takeaway. What about you?
Yeah, it was weird. It was just, I've been in a fight, and the one loss I had, I was trailing from the get. I got hurt very early. I think with the very first punch thrown, I was already emotional, and I never recovered from it. And it's just a weird swarming feeling where the only thing you feel you can do is just survive. And then there are bits and pieces or like spurts of moments where you just feel like, oh, okay, this is the time to push back, and the opponent will just like kind of, blanket that. And I felt like anytime Woodley tried anything, period, it just seemed like Burns was able to just kind of like swallow that up and brush it back and not let Woodley get any offensive going, period. So then, it felt like Woodley was just going to settle in that placement of, this is where I'm at. I'm on the back foot. I'm just going to throw these counters. And then there was no backup. And he didn't sound like it, you could obviously hear his corner's advice. Dean Thomas was in his corner, and it didn't seem like he was following his instructions at all. Until it got to the point where all Dean could tell him was like, you got to knock him out. And he obviously couldn't by that point. So it was if you're a Woodley fan, it had to be very frustrating to watch, just, seeing, him basically just be out there, and that's it. That's all he did. That's all he could do. He did the bare minimum of making sure he didn't get finished, which was impressive considering how hurt he was in the first round. But after that, it seemed like he was just coasting to what he felt, what he is eventually came to realize was going to be the inevitable, and to kind of be accepting of the fact that that's how that fight went, and to be okay with it. That never seems like that's the kind of attitude that any fighter that's ever going to win a title or get back to a title, or somebody that's a title contender, that's not the kind of mindset we ever really see from somebody like that. And then they go on to do big, great things. And you got to remember, Tyron Woodley, it surprises many when I say this, but he's 38 years old, probably one of the oldest welterweights in the top 10 next to Maia. Man, Maia's like 41, right?
He's like 74.
Yeah, I think behind Maia, he's the oldest welterweight in the top 10. So, Maia is known for not having taken too much damage, at the very least. Woodley, not too much damage either, but he's been in some sporadic wars, some very technical wars, such as with Wonder Boy, and now here, in these last 10 rounds, he's, kind of been swallowed up a little bit by the opposition, and he's just older, and I think that guy has probably put his body through more than I would argue Maya has in the terms of, that guy has done more training with more high level guys, I would say, such as, the GSPs of the world. He's been at, the gyms that he's trained at, where he's had to train at a very high level. And before that, he had a very, notable wrestling career. He's done a lot in his time as a competitor. So I imagine he's starting to now hit that downward trajectory of his career at this point, unfortunately. And unless he can perform and show us something otherwise, I think that's just where he is now in his career, unfortunately. But that was UFC Fight Night. Man, what number is this?
Way too many.
Yeah. Well, this was UFC on ESPN 9, technically, as far as it didn't have a Fight Night regulated number to it because it was on ESPN. So they kind of keep those distinctually different. But otherwise, yeah, that was UFC on ESPN 9. Again, like, the card didn't have a lot of name value, but it had some amazing performances and fights. I especially enjoyed it. I thought it was a decent card, probably one of the more exciting of the year. We now move on forward to UFC 250, which is a pay-per-view this Saturday going down. Will be at the UFC Apex, just as this last fight card was, but it will be a pay-per-view. But as far as name value goes for this one, it's not that much better, and it's a pay-per-view. I mean, it's been one of those cards where, unfortunately, just like we couldn't get the kind of steamroll that UFC 249 was able to get, where they packed it and it had a lot of name value on it. And it was fun to watch, and the card delivered. And now this one could still deliver, but right off the cuff, you wonder how well this one will do in terms of pay-per-view sales or buys, even in the pandemic, where this is one of the very few sports on TV right now that you can watch. How do you see this one doing?
Well, I mean, I'm not all that concerned about the pay-per-view numbers. I mean, it's not going to do well, obviously. Pay-per-views are almost always dominated by the headliner, right? If you got a guy that could sell in the headliner, the rest of the card can be, like, sometimes dog shit. We've seen some Conor McGregor cards where, the rest of the main card and the prelims are terrible. I'll actually defend this card. It's actually a well put together card. And again, keep in mind, the vast majority of these fights were really only put together on 3-4 weeks notice, right? You could say like a Sun Tzu and Garbrandt that was supposed to happen in March. They were kind of already training, so we moved it over. But, putting together Sandhagen, Sterling, getting O'Malley, which is, of course, a great fight. Getting O'Malley back, which is great, to see him have a quick turnaround. I'm a big fan of Anthony Rocco Martin. Really curious to see how he does against Neil Magny. And if you go further down, you got, Chase Hooper, who's a bit of a wild card, up against Alex Caceres, who's, again, another wild card. And, even on the early prelims, you got Juicy Formiga and Alex Perez. So, I mean, you've had some good fights, but you're right. None of these are going to jump off the page to the casual fan. They're not going to tune in to watch Amanda Nunes fight Felicia Spencer. I mean, if I was to put together a list of, like, my top 5 fights on this card that I'm looking forward to, that probably wouldn't even make it. That's not to say that I don't love watching Amanda fight, because I do, but in terms of having I don't want to use the word valid opponent, but in terms of having someone who's a real threat to take her title, I just don't see that in Felicia Spencer. She survived against Cyborg, so I give her credit. But, I think this 145 division, women's 145 division in the UFC, I think they really got to think about wrapping that up. There's really not much there at all. They built it for Cyborg after so much protest on her part. Of course, Nunes beats her, Cyborg goes out the door, and now they're putting together with, like, everything's being held together with duct tape. So it's just a revolving door of Megan Anderson, Felicia Spencer, and the woman from France whose name I can never remember. And then some random bantamweights jumping up like Jermaine Durandamy and Holly Holm. So, I mean, let's just let Nunes keep the title, queen of the 145, shut it down, and let's just go back down to 135 and let Nunes pick up where she left off there because there's just much more challenges for her. But as of 250, but for 250, I should say, I do like it. But at the same time, I understand why the casual fan won't be that thrilled with the card at first glance.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fights. Yeah, Sun-South Garbrandt, I like that fight. It's going to be interesting to see where Garbrandt is, considering, he's on a 3-fight skid. The guy said he wants to win this one and drop the flyweight. If he can do that in a healthy manner, on like TJ Dillashaw, then it'd be interesting to see how he does. Flyweight definitely is another division that needs a lot of life injected into it, and he's someone that could do that. And then, especially considering the title picture is up for grabs, essentially, with Benavidez and Figueroa possibly fighting again for the title up in the near future. Obviously, the next contender could be him, should he win, and then just decide to drop down. Like he could easily be, gifted that next title shot. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. Sterling Sandhagen, you could argue this as like a bantamweight title fight. That really could have been something they could have done, but then a lot of people would have argued that Petr Yan or Marlon Moraes might have gotten the short end of the stick there. But I mean, just based on the fact that the coronavirus is really impacting a lot these fighters being able to go out and fight. I think that they could have been forgiven for maybe making this a bantamweight fight, maybe putting a second title on this card. But regardless of that, it's still a great fight. And another aspect to that would have been great to see these bantamweights fight in a 5-round fight. But despite that, it's still a great fight. I'm very excited about it. And like I said, like you and me, we can look at this card, see it for what it is, and still really be excited for a lot of these fight cards on here. I actually am very excited to see Hooper. I like it when young guys just kind of show up out of nowhere. I was that same way when Max Holloway showed up, when Dustin Poirier showed up, honestly. What's his name? I can't remember his name right now. Sage Northcutt. I was excited for guys like him. Got young guys who pop up. Sometimes they go on to have these long, successful careers, such as Holloway did, such as Poirier did. And it's going to be interesting to see where young guys like Hooper go. Caceres is a great test. He's always he's that quintessential gatekeeper at featherweight right now. And it's going to be interesting to see where Hooper goes from here, if he can get past Caceres. Because then, that's the kind of test that says, all right, maybe we have something here. And then from there, we get to see really where his trajectory is. You got Cody Stamann, too, against Kelleher. That's surprisingly on the prelims, I guess understandably so. But that's a good fight. That's a really good fight between some featherweights who are definitely up and coming, who are fun to watch, who have, really, kind of been under the radar as of right now. But to the guys in the know, those are two guys who really have been delivering in terms of performances, just showing that they're dominant fighters that could go somewhere someday. So to put them together, I really like that fight as well. That's UFC 250. Again, we have Nunes Spencer at the top of the card, and the billing really is just, well, it's not that big of a threat. I mean, the only real entertainment value you have is in watching it. You might see probably one of the biggest upsets you ever see in your life. Other than that, you're expecting heavily so, a wash performance by Nunes, just going in there. Because we got to remember, Nunes was a grappler before she became the striker that she is now. Mainly dominated women by taking them down and beating them up and getting the ground and pound of the submission. And she showed, she really opened up that game, that style in her last fight against Durandamy, and now gets to really probably uncork a lot of her striking prowess as long as she can keep it standing on the feet. And against Spencer, I'm not sure I see much reason why that can't happen. So that's kind of why I expect this to be kind of a watch performance where she keeps it standing, she dominates Spencer on the feet, probably gets a finish maybe in the second or third round.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next topic, I love when the UFC has to create promos for fights that aren't all that even, and it's great because now
I know they got Spencer coming down a hallway, like she's like the next coming of, this is going to be the next Matt Serra type deal. You know what I mean? That's kind of the fever pitch I'm getting.
But the one that I like the most is where she's a legitimate 145 pounder. You know what I mean? That's their thing. She's actually she's not a 35er moving up. She's a legit 45, right. Can't make 35. And I'm like, if that's all you have to sell us on this fight, I'm like, dude, yeah. Nunes, murders people at 45. So just because Spencer's a legit 45er, size wise, that doesn't give her any advantage whatsoever. Like you said, like a lot of people are saying, like Spencer has a good ground game. I'm like, I agree. Is she going to get it to the ground? Like, good luck, you know? Um, so anyways, we'll move on from that. You know, again, Nunes and Spencer, it is what it is. Should be just another notch on Nunes's belt to continue her GOAT run of women's MMA. But you know, the last thing we kind of wanted to talk about today was the situation kind of brewing for a while now between Jon Jones and Dana White. So I'll kind of let you go first. What did you make of that whole back and forth and kind of where we're at now?
Well, let's surmise that. And there's the fact that, you know, there was a lot of excitement. We've talked about it on here about how Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou were kind of, you know, jabbing at each other, talking about a fight. And we were like getting real excited, but like, we'll see. I've certainly was skeptical the second the fight was even being talked about. And sure enough, interestingly enough, when it was brought to Dana's attention following one of the UFC Fight Night cards after 249, he didn't seem that sold on it or that it would happen. And in fact, he brushed it off saying, these are guys that just talk. So it seemed like from the very get, Dana himself was never excited about this fight. It didn't seem like it was a fight that he ever saw happening. It just seemed like he thought those two were just talking, and that he didn't seem excited for it. He didn't, like, even at the prospect of that fight happening, he didn't seem excited, which was weird because, I mean, if you're Dana, if you're any promoter, I don't see why that fight wouldn't invigorate you and go, oh, that's a fight I need to make happen. For sure, everybody wants to see that fight. And the consensus, anywhere you look, I don't even have to look, but I guarantee you, just from what I've seen, there's no way that no fan doesn't want to see that fight. Everyone wants to see that fight. That's a fight everybody wants to see. As I said, the last time we were on here, that's the biggest heavyweight fight you can make. It's bigger than the trilogy fight between Cormier and Stipe. Not by a lot, but it is, I think, personally. If you had to put two headline cards together and see which one does better on the pay-per-view sales, I think that one probably sells better, just based on the notoriety of Jon Jones, based on his past, based on him being the former champion, based on him being the guy that's beaten Daniel Cormier in the past, based on everything that we know about Francis now, his position now, the fact that he's probably regarded almost unanimously so as the heaviest hitter in the UFC period right now. There's so much more to that fight than the trilogy fight, a fight which we've seen twice now. And a lot of people don't even actually, I wouldn't say the majority, but there are definitely fans who have cited that they don't care to see the trilogy fight, that they would just rather the division move on and other contenders be able to fight for the belt. So that's why that's the biggest fight. And it was surprising to me that Dana never cared from the start to see that fight. But both Jones and Francis came to Dana. Like even Francis himself cited he tried talking to the UFC about this fight, and they weren't gonna. They told him, just as they told Jones, they were not going to shell out more money for this fight. And the deal with Jones was that there were talks between Jones and the UFC's lawyer or Dana's lawyer. I'm not sure who this lawyer specifically works for. I don't think that was ever cited, but the conversation that Dana puts out is saying that Jones told this lawyer that he wanted Deontay Wilder money. Jones refutes that, says, that's not what happened. I never gave a figure. I never brought that up. And then so it became a back and forth thing where Dana says, well, you're lying. And Jones says, well, I'm not. You're lying. And Dana says, well, I have text, but I'm not going to show it. Jones obviously refutes that these texts even exist. It got to the point where this game of chicken got to where now Jones is citing, saying, I'm just going to give this belt up. I'm done. I'm walking away until you're ready to pay me more. And Dana himself has tried to come off nonchalant about it, saying if that's what he wants to do, that's what he wants to do. He's not, it's not the best time for fighters to be asking for more money considering the coronavirus thing. And he cited reasons why the UFC is losing out on money. The fact that there's no live gate, the fact that obviously because of the fact that there's no live gate, it trickles down to there being other aspects to which financially they're taking hits. And so there's a lot on each side to where I'm seeing the argument as to why, like John Jones, if he moves to heavyweight, should get paid more. But due to the coronavirus, like Dana cites that the UFC can't afford to pay other guys more right now. And that makes sense. And I would have, and again, I don't know if this is the case. No one really knows. But if I had to guess here, and before I pass it over to you, if I had to guess here, I would say that might be the biggest sourcing reason. And if Dana is lying himself, I don't see why he couldn't. And that's a big if. I don't know. No, we can only guesstimate or speculate. But I would say that it would have probably been better for Dana to say, "Hey, look, that's just a fight we can't make right now. It's either too big. I need a live gate for that one." Or, if once the Corona thing is passed and we're back to normal, then maybe we could talk about that fight. But he didn't. He decided not to go down that avenue. If that's the case, again, this is just me speculating. I can't say for sure. No one can really say any option for sure. But the biggest story about this now is now we're at a point where John Jones is saying he's going to give up the light heavyweight title. And that would be crazy. That would leave a third title vacant for the UFC if it happens, if it's true. And that would obviously be big in terms of if John Jones went through with it, then where does he go next? And does he get his contract cut like he's been asking for? I highly doubt that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so going back and forth with Jones and Dana, who's lying, who's not lying. I mean, no one knows for sure. At the end of the day, we do know that UFC fighters in general are underpaid, right? There's numerous accounts where you can look to see what they earn in terms of revenue share. It typically falls somewhere around 18%. If you were to compare MMA fighters to boxing fighters on a scale and find out what the average income for each would be, it's actually not that far apart. Where it gets interesting, and I think, with there being so much fuss over fighter pay with the antitrust lawsuit, all this, information coming to light, where it gets interesting is that the top boxers in the world, the Canelos, the Triple Gs, the Deontay Wilders, et cetera, they're all making big money a fight. They're making, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, up to 50. And then if you have a Floyd, for example, it could be much more than that. I think Jones knows that although he's being paid very well, he mentioned he's making about $5 million a fight all in. He did come out with that. A lot of times they'll say, or you'll see by the disclosed salaries, they made like $500,000, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, that's so low." Okay, well, there's other things to factor in. So let's say it's $5 million. I think he knows that number could be 20 million because he draws as much as a Deontay Wilder. A Deontay Wilder pay-per-view versus a Jones Ngannou pay-per-view, I think would do similar-ish numbers. And I think he understands that he's probably missing the boat on a 15, 20, 25, $30 million payday. He knows it's not going to come. He knows Dana's not going to hand over that kind of money to him. But I think he's using this as a sticking point. I think he's Hey, doggy. I think he's trying to make a splash and try and get other fighters on his side aware of the discrepancies between MMA and boxing. It's not something he's going to win on his own. But I think ultimately when he put it out there and said, "I'd like to have more money," whether or not he gave Dana a figure and Dana shut it down right away, I think they both went into a bit of a defensive mode and they're in both of a standoff right now. The UFC is not going to release John Jones. They're not going to. They'll find a way to keep him happy. I don't know if they're going to make the Francis fight happen, right? He may not get a big payday to fight Francis, but maybe they'll give him a little bit more and he'll fight a Blachowicz or a Reyes in a rematch or something like that. But you also mentioned about the potential vacancy of titles. 25 is vacant. 35 is vacant. 45 is MIA because Volkanovski's in New Zealand and, there's no return date set for him or Adesanya yet, who's at 85. At 55, you got Nurmagomedov. His father's obviously sick. He's also out of country. 205 is maybe vacant now. And then at heavyweight, you got Stipe, who's not currently able to fight. So as it stands, Kamaru is like the only guy on the men's side of things that is currently able to put together a fight. So the UFC is in a weird spot because they got to fill cards for the next 2-3 months. And how many title fights? How many big name fights are they going to be able to put together? They're in a real rough spot. And I mean, the live gate is one thing, and for sure they could say, hey, we're missing out on money because of live gate. That's why we're not going to pay you this. But if there wasn't coronavirus pandemic going on right now, it would be some of the reason why they couldn't pay them that amount of money. At the end of the day, the fighters are getting a certain percentage of the revenue, and it doesn't matter what happens. That 18%, give or take a couple percent either way, is going to be what the UFC wants to keep it at. And I think Jones knows that, and he's just pushing, trying to see if he can get them to cave. And Dana, as he's shown throughout his career, has never been that guy. So I wish nothing but the best for Jones. I'm sure he'll be back. I'm sure they'll work it out. But as of now, I think it's just a bit of a pissing contest, and give it a couple of weeks, and I think they'll come together and find some common ground.
Yeah, I'll finalize this with, I think the biggest thing Dana hopes for is that he can get these champions that are unable to compete in the States to Fight Island, if that's a thing. I still have my doubts on that, by the way. And so, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all these fights with these champions, of which, have yet to compete in a while due to the coronavirus. So I think that ultimately it comes down to how viable the Fight Island thing is. That's in a month, according to Dana. He wants to start getting these rolling out in July, and it's June now. So we got a whole month, and he's got a few fight cards here to get through at the Apex now. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And yeah, when it comes to John Jones, I can't see them letting him go. And so who knows if they decide to just keep his contract hostage, it'll be interesting to see what they do with him, because if he doesn't want to fight, then they'll just cite, well, John doesn't want to fight, but he's still under contract with us. And it doesn't mean we haven't offered him fights, because they probably will offer him fights and say, okay, because we offered him a fight, there's no reason why we have to let him go if he's just not accepting the fight. Like, he's still under contract with us. And so they keep him under that kind of like tight hold for a while if they decided to, and he just doesn't fight or doesn't get paid. So we'll see. I mean, like I said, I don't think that personally, if you had to ask me and I had to throw some money on it, I'd say Dana just doesn't want to, shell out the money right now because he's losing money, according to him. Whether or not even that's true, it's interesting to see, where really the pendulum lies on who's lying the most or who's really being the most, facetious. I just don't know. I really don't, because these are two figures that, obviously you can never trust Dana at full value, and John Jones, it's hard to trust the guy.
Yeah, full. Same thing.
So it's really weird situation, but I do want to see that Jones Francis fight. That hasn't changed. The world's not going to change their stance on that. Everyone wants to see that fight for sure. And if Dana were to come out and say, hey, look, I want to wait till we can get a live gate for that fight, because that's one of the biggest fights we can ever make in the UFC, period. I could respect that. I could say, you know what? Makes sense. I can get with that, Same with if they said that about Conor, because he's super wishy-washy with Conor as well. Like, is he going to come back? Is he not? Who knows? Conor says he wants to come back and fight. So I think Conor might just force their hand and say, hey, look, I want to fight. Just give me whoever, and then they have there's like negotiation there, right? Where they can maybe set up a fight that they feel makes the most sense for someone like him on a Fight Island or something like that, right?
Right.
So
right.
We'll see what happens. There's a lot of, the Fight Island aspect of this definitely changes things. The coronavirus obviously has been changing things left and right in regards to the fight game and where these fights take place and how these fights go. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and wrap up. But this has been a great show. Great talking with you, Joe. And, we'll look forward to UFC 250 this weekend. It goes down this Saturday. It is on pay-per-view. And we'll talk about that one next week.
All right, my man. We'll be with you next week, guys.
Later, y'all.